So this video is going over the tests for the poker AI. So the first test is whether the poker player restrictions are the same as any other player playing. So what should be expected is that the AI cannot do anything a player cannot do, and it will have the freedom to choose what it wants to do based on its evaluation of the game within the boundaries of what a player can do. So we'll get a screen running and then we can see if this works. So we'll get 5 players, increase the chip count so we have some time and stuff to play with. So here we can see it's not the AI player, is player 2, so they're big blind. So if I bet 12 here, just for all the players, and then just bet 8 so they're all on the same, what will happen is that this player, the AI, will be down by 4. So in order to stay in, it will have to decide whether its hand is good enough to stay into the flop. So here it just decided whether it was going to stay in or not. You can see by the amount of chips it has that it decided to stay in because it is the same as everyone else's, so it's paid the same amount. So now it's decided to stay in, we can play a normal game. So if I just run a check through everything and then a raise here, the AI is now evaluating what's happened and it's deciding what it wants to do compared to what the players have done already and their positions and the strength of its hand in comparison to the shared cards seen and what it thinks other players have in their hands and what it thinks the possible shared cards could be. So it's running through all of that, all the different possibilities, things like that, and then it will decide what it wants to do. So when there are 2 shared cards that can't be seen, this is when it takes the longest because there is around 4,500,000 different possibilities it's going through for each player. But this is going to be a slightly different number dependent on how it deems the other players' hands are in regard to strength. So here it just decided to call the raise that player 1 made. So we'll just run through with this and go to the turn. So now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to check all the way through and then bet with player 1 and get the reaction of the AI player. So now there's only 1 card that's not seen. It will take the AI player a lot less time to decide what it wants to do. As you can see there, it was a lot quicker. Again, it's just decided to check. Not to check, to see player 1's raise. If we look at the hands here, I printed off how strong everyone's hands are. So you can see they're all pretty much the same value, but the AI player has a losing hand. Not that it knows it, but it has a losing hand compared to player 3 and player 5 who have a winning hand. But as it stands, everyone has a very similar hand, so it's just playing along because it gets the idea that they do have a similar hand, but it doesn't really know whether the AI's hand is stronger than the other players or the player's hand is stronger than its. So we'll just play through to the river. So now it can see all the shared cards. The AI has a great idea of whose hand's probably the strongest by now. So if we check again all the way through and player 1 raises, we'll get the AI's reaction, and you can see it's folded because it knows it's probably lost this. Due to the fact this queen is now showing, it knows that other players' cards have probably got a stronger hand than the AI does. So it decides to quit while it's ahead and conserve the amount of chips it has. So you can see throughout the whole thing, the restrictions are the same as a player. It cannot bet outside the range, cannot check when it's not supposed to, it cannot do anything unusual. So that test is a pass. So test 2 we have just done as well, so the AI can recognise when it needs to do a specific thing in order to preserve its chip count. The AI will go through all the players and determine if it will win, lose or draw against them. This is done by looking at the possible hands that a given player could have against the AIs. The possibles are defined by what the player has done in the previous betting rounds and their location. So we can see right at the end here, the AI decided to fold because it thought it was going to lose. So it preserved its chip count, which is the correct thing to do for test 2. So that's a pass. So test 3 is the AI recognises when it is its turn, and it will start to act. So what should be expected is that when it's the AI's turn, it will begin to determine what to do. So if we run through to another round where the AI is unfolded, then we can do this test. So here we see the AI is the small blind. So we're just going to run through to the AI, and we can see it decided to act and put some money in so it can get to the flop. So if we check through and then place a bet here, we can see now that the AI is thinking what it wants to do, and then it will act after it's decided whether its hand is good enough to continue in comparison to everyone else's. It cannot see anyone else's hands, it's just guessing what their hands could be out of all the possible cards that it cannot see, including the 3 shared cards and its cards. And it's then using what the player's already done, so how the player's acted already, and the location on the in the betting order to determine whether their hand could be certain things or not. So here you can see the AI is now raised to 12, so it will have a very good hand. So the AI does recognise when it's turn, and it will start to act. So that's a pass. So is what the AI is determining to do correct/sensible? So what should be expected is that when the AI has made its move, it is sensible to what it's going on and in the game. For example, if it isn't going all in when it shouldn't. So here we see it's done quite a big bet. So we're going to look to see if that is a justified bet or if it's not. So here we can see the different hands of everyone, and the AI has a hand of 52, which other than this 72 would be joint winning. So these are the final hand scores, but as it stands, the AI does not see these 2 cards, so it thinks it can beat the rest of the players. So these are the probabilities that it can beat all the other players. So against player 1, it thinks it will definitely beat it. Against player 3, it will think it is very likely. Player 4 is very likely, and player 5 is very likely. You can see that these are all slightly different depending on how the players acted already and their position on the board. So we're just going to go ahead and meet that raise, and then we can see what the AI does on the turn. So here I'm just going to do another raise so we can tell when it's the AI's turn thinking. So here we see the AI is raised to 12 again, so it still thinks it's got a really strong hand. So we scroll down. It's now got a slightly lower winning percentage on player 1 and a slightly lower winning percentage on player 3 and 4. So only player 3 and 4 seem to have the same winning percentage. That means they've acted the similar way and their position is similar, which it is. So it's got the highest winning percentage against player 1, as it thinks it's still going to win. But as we've seen at the start, it doesn't win. So that means this last river card in the shared cards will give player 4 the winning edge over player 2. So player 4 is this player. As you can see, the AI is evaluated to see that there's only a 2.89% chance of it losing to this player. So that means this river card is that 2.89% chance. So if we run through and see the river card, here we can see the river card is 9. So if we just run through and get a check, we'll see what the computer does again. So here the AI is raised again to 12. So it still thinks it's got a winning hand in comparison to the others. But again, it's dropped slightly. So it still doesn't know what the player's hand is, but it reckons, based on what the player's done, because there's been quite a lot of checking, that it has a stronger hand. So if we just meet this 12 with all the players, we can now see that the chip count of player 4 has increased because it had the strongest hand. So that test successful in a way, because it knew that it had a very strong hand. It just got outplayed right at the end with a slightly better hand, so that's the pass. Does the AI make its decisions quickly in order to keep the game flowing? So what should be expected is that when the AI has to make a decision, it is quick in making it, but is also accurate. So if we just start a game, we'll get a game with fewer players running up, so we can determine the speed. So we'll run it with 3 players. So here we can see the AI player is still player 2, and we're going to run through and see if the AI's speed is very good. So I'm actually going to raise before the flop and see how quickly the AI responds. So here we can see the AI pretty much instantly responded by seeing my raise. So we can tell that it's got a pretty good hand. So I'm just going to meet the 18 here with player 3, and then we can see how it reacts to the flop here. So if I place a bet of 6 on both these players, we'll determine how long this takes for the AI to decide what it wants to do. You can see there that it's actually taken a little bit longer than it did in the first round, but that's to be expected because it has more data to analyse now. But it's still very quick in consideration to how much it's going through. It did meet the bet of 6, so everyone is in this at the moment. So if I check with the player 3 and bet with player 1 even, we can see that AI is now deciding what it wants to do, and it decided to fold because it doesn't think its hand's good enough, so it's conserving its chips. So if I just meet this bet by player 1 with player 3, then we'll just run through to get the AI back in play so we can continue testing. So here, if I just meet the big blind, we'll see what the AI does. So the AI decides to meet it as well, because we can see that the pot is equal to 3 times 12, so everyone betted 12. So here I'm just going to bet a low bet of 6 with player 1 and see how AI reacts and how quickly it reacts. So here it's going through all the different combinations of stuff and all the data it has, and it's deciding what it wants to do. It takes the longest time after the flop, as I said, but it's decided to fold because it's not bet here, and it's move on to the next turn. So as you can see, that's quite quick and it keeps the game flowing, so that test is a pass.